All right. Being an English teacher can be hard. It can be stressful. There's a lot that we're thinking about, a lot that we're worried about, how to make the best lessons. We're concerned about our students. We care. I think that's one thing that all teachers have in common. But when we're planning for lessons and we're teaching, we tend to be very focused on the what. We're focused on the grammar, the vocabulary. We're focused on the pronunciation. We're focused on the skills, the reading, the writing, the listening, the speaking. We're focused on passing the tests. We're focused on preparing them however we can with language. And we're focused on the what of the language. This, I think, is what leads to a lot of teachers feeling a bit like this, a bit burnt out, working many more hours than they should, not getting paid appropriately for it. That's a whole nother talk we can do another time. But just spinning your wheels, spinning your wheels, spinning your wheels, focused on the what. If you haven't seen this TED Talk, I highly, highly recommend it. Simon Sinek, talking about focusing on your why, starting from the why. And he talks about how great leaders, inspiring leaders, they are inspiring because they have a strong why. They have a reason for doing things that is so much bigger than themselves, that is so important that it motivates the people around them to follow them. And I think as teachers, we need to also remember our why, because that is what in the end keeps us going through all of the what. So I'd like to challenge you to think back to the very beginning. For me, this was my university, which is shown here, University of the Pacific in California. Think back to where you first started. Why did you go into this field? I sat at university on the first day of class at the School of International Studies, and I remember our professor asking, why are you here? Why do you want to study this? What are you going to do with your life? And of course, my hand shot right up. Rob knows me, I'm sure that doesn't surprise him. And I said, I'm going to be Secretary of State. And this was during the time of Madeleine Albright, our first Secretary of State in the US as a woman Secretary of State, who was really inspiring for me. And really what was underneath all of that was this quest for world peace. You know, this was my Miss America moment of, I want to see a peaceful world around me. So how do we go from Secretary of State to English language teacher? That's also an entirely different talk. But there's more in common with it than you might think. Because really, for me, being an English language teacher, what I found in teaching English, why it's so incredibly important to me, and I'm sure this will resonate with all of you, is because the English language is such a gift. It allows us to connect with other people from different backgrounds, different cultures. It brings our world together. It allows us to discuss. It allows us to argue. It allows us to learn and grow. And it is what can lead to global understanding. And if you take this idea of, I want to teach people a language and make it bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, that's, for me, where I end up. I end up with global understanding, that this tool, this what, this language, this grammar and these words and this pronunciation, it isn't just that, but it's leading to something so much bigger. So when I identified this bigger why, this burning why, it led me to more research on the subject. And that's what led me to English as a lingua franca. And I'm sure you're all very familiar with this. If you aren't, then I strongly suggest looking into English as a lingua franca, because the whole point of it is, how can we be best understood across languages, across cultures? How we focus on teaching the principles that will make people best understood. That's horrible grammar, but I think you know what I mean here. So the focus is on understanding, which really hits home for me with my big why. It's focusing on, how can I help my clients, my students, connect with other people and understand each other and impact the world with respect and understanding. Another thing that I learned in my lingua franca journey is, you know, we have 400 million native speakers and 2 billion non-native speakers. And I know that we're all language people here, but the math isn't so tough. I mean, why are we trying to fit the 2 billion into the 400 million box? Why aren't we also talking about how the 400 million need to adapt and accommodate to the 2 billion who are learning and struggling and doing their very best to connect with us in our own language? And that's why I also believe that this strong why of connecting people, of building understanding, it goes different directions. It's not only for the people who are learning and developing and trying to learn English, but also for all of the native speakers who need to make that step as well, to meet halfway, to know that, you know, we don't own this language. And it's just as important for us to connect and learn and try and take responsibility for our communication. As a native speaker, this is a very important concept for me, and one that I am very aware of. And I think we all need to be aware of that. I also keep this in mind because I think it empowers our non-native speaker teachers who may have those moments where they think, maybe I'm not good enough because I'm not native. Maybe all these job ads are right, that a native speaker can do this better than me. Now, I think all of us in the industry know that that's not true. Any of us who really take the time to look at our industry and understand what it takes to teach a language knows that someone who has gone through the practice of learning the language actually is able to teach it in a much different way, and in a way that even better can connect with the students. But here's the problem that I have with this whole global understanding concept, and it is that, is understanding enough? Okay, I can teach you how to do a T and a D sound, and I can make sure that they're unique, and I can make sure that you don't mix them up, and I can make sure that the person you're speaking to understands you. But is understanding enough? Are our words enough? Is the what enough? And that's where I run into some difficulty with English as a lingua franca and the focus on understanding. And it's where I run into some problems separating the what and the why, because if we're only focused on the words, that's great. Okay, they understood the words, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that person is being respected, is being tolerated, is being seen for who they are. So we need to remember as English teachers that we are much more than language teachers. It isn't only the what. We're sending people out into the world to communicate, to understand each other, to connect on a deeper level. The English language is simply a tool. And I have a minute and a half left. The English language is simply a tool that we use to connect. But simple understanding of words isn't the end goal. Okay, so what I'd like to challenge all of you today is, when you're looking at your lesson plans, when you are planning for your students, go back to your why. And maybe it's similar to mine, maybe it's something completely different, but go bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger to figure out, why is it you're really here? And when you do that, you also realize how incredibly valuable you are. If you're trying to figure out your niche, if you're trying to sell your services, suddenly when you are connected to your why, you realize how much value you bring to the table as a teacher. You aren't just teaching grammar and vocabulary and pronunciation and speaking skills. You're teaching connection, you're teaching understanding, you're teaching common courtesy and respect, you're teaching culture, you're teaching confidence, probably more than anything, confidence. And when you're connected with that and you walk into the classroom with that in your toolbox, with that in your school bag, your teaching completely changes. And that's where you begin to inspire your students. That's when it becomes more than a language class. And that's when you truly begin to build global understanding. Under 10 minutes. Oh, we should bet. We should have had a bet, Rob.
I did. I just lost $50.